Helen Emily is making this impossible again. She turned down the money I offered for Lily's tutoring like it was some kind of insult. I have been trying to help that child get ahead, but her mother acts like I'm the one causing problems. You know how Emily is always so quick to push people away when they try to do something nice. I had to step in last month when the school called about the late payment, and instead of gratitude, I got a speech about how she can handle her own life. Joe, honestly, if she keeps this up, Lily is going to grow up thinking family is optional, and I refuse to let that happen on my watch. Hi, my name is Emily Harper. I am 30 years old. I stood in the narrow hallway of the family cabin with Lily's backpack still looped over my wrist, the canvas strap biting into my skin. The words had come through the phone speaker in the living room clear enough that I could have repeated them back word for word. My mother had left the device on speaker while she talked to Helen, her oldest friend, the one she called whenever she needed an audience for stories about me. She had no idea I had walked in from the kitchen to grab Lily's things for the walk we were supposed to take around the property. The cabin sat in northern Michigan, tucked among pines that had been there longer than any of us. My mother had pushed for the trip after a pipe burst in my apartment 2 weeks earlier and turned the place into a wet, ruined mess. She had called it an act of generosity, a chance for Lily and me to breathe while repairs happened. I had said yes because refusing would have meant another round of quiet disappointment from her, and I was already carrying too much of that. But standing there listening to her rewrite my life for Helen's benefit, I understood the trip had never been about rest for me. It was about keeping me where she could see every move I made. The drive up from our suburb south of Grand Rapids had already warned me what kind of weekend this would be. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head tipped against the window while my mother sat beside me and dismantled the way I handled Lily's school reading program. She had offered to call the principal herself just to make sure they understand what Lily needs. When I told her I had already spoken with the teacher and had it handled, she gave that short laugh she saved for moments when she wanted me to feel small. You always think you can manage everything by yourself, she had said, her voice light but edged. Some of us remember what it's like when things get hard. I'm only trying to keep Lily from missing out. I had kept my eyes on the road and my hands steady on the wheel. Arguing in the car would have woken Lily, and I would not let my daughter hear that tone aimed at me. The rest of the drive had passed in a silence thick enough to choke on broken only by the radio and the occasional sigh from my mother that said more than any lecture. Now the phone call had torn the last of that polite surface away. I walked back into the kitchen and set Lily's backpack on the counter with more care than the moment deserved. My hands stayed steady, but something inside my chest had pulled tight and stayed there. For years, I had told myself my mother's offers came from love, that the strings attached were just the price of having family clothes. Hearing her lay it out for Helen made that story impossible to keep telling. If you have ever overheard someone you trusted turn your private struggles into the reason they get to play the hero, you know the particular cold that settles behind your ribs and does not leave. That cold was sitting with me while I stood in my mother's kitchen listening to the sound of her easy laughter as she wrapped up the call. I did not go in and confront her. I waited until she ended the call and came into the kitchen to start the kettle, her face arranged in the calm concern she always wore when she wanted something from me. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" she asked. "You look a little pale." I looked at her, really looked. For the first time in a long time, I did not see the woman who had raised me. I saw the woman who had just told her friend that I was the problem in my own daughter's life. "I'm fine," I said. The words came out level the way I'd trained myself to speak, when keeping the peace mattered more than being heard. Just tired from the drive? She smiled the smile that never touched her eyes and patted my arm. That's why we're here, to let family take care of things for a change. I nodded because that was the script, but the words from the phone were still looping in my head, and I knew the script had already started to fall apart. The rest of the afternoon moved in small, careful steps. Lily played on the porch with a box of old blocks my mother had pulled from the storage closet, talking to herself about the stories she would tell her teacher when we got home. My mother sat in the living room chair with a magazine, calling out suggestions for things Lily might like to do tomorrow. I moved through the rooms like I was walking on glass, every step measured so I would not crack anything open before I was ready. That night, after Lily was asleep in the back bedroom, I found myself in the small office nook off the living room. The old desktop my father had set up years ago still sat on the desk, the screen dark, but the mouse pad warm. My mother had been using it earlier. I sat down and nudged the mouse. The screen lit up on the email account she still used when she was here. I knew I should walk away. Opening someone else's email crossed a line I had never crossed before, but the phone call was still fresh, and I needed to know whether what I had heard was a single vent or something that had been building for longer than I wanted to admit. I clicked into the sent folder. The first message that loaded had been written 2 weeks earlier, addressed to Helen. The subject line read, Lily's tutoring. Emily being difficult again. My finger hovered. I could close the window. I could go back to the living room and sit beside my mother like the words on the screen did not exist. I opened the email instead. It was long and detailed, the same sharp concern she had used on the phone. She described how she had paid for Lily's tutoring program without telling me first, how I had made a scene when I found out how I was teaching Lily to be ungrateful for family help. She wrote that she worried about what would happen to Lily if I kept pushing everyone away. At the bottom of the message was an attachment, an old photograph. It was a picture of me at 6 or 7, standing next to my mother at some family gathering I no longer remembered. I was smiling at the camera. My mother was looking slightly off to the side, her expression already set in the same careful patience she still used with me. In the caption field of the email, she had typed a single line. This is the one who always needed extra help. Some things never change. I read it twice. The words sat on the screen like they had been waiting for me to find them. I closed the email but left the screen on. The photo stayed visible in the dark nook. I walked back into the living room where my mother was still sitting with her magazine. She looked up when I came in, and for a second her face held the same calm mask. Then she saw something in my expression and the mask slipped. Is everything all right, Emily? She asked, her voice careful now. I stood in the doorway with my hands at my sides and realized the cabin had never been an escape. It was the place where the story my mother had spent years writing about our family had finally started to come undone in front of me. The silence in the living room stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. My mother was still watching me from her chair, the magazine forgotten in her lap, her expression shifting from careful concern into something sharper. She stood slowly smoothing her sweater with deliberate hands. You look like you've seen a ghost, Emily. Did something happen while I was on the phone with Helen? I kept my voice even. Nothing I didn't already know. Her mouth tightened at the edges the way it always did when I refused to play along. If this is about the tutoring money again, I was only trying to help. Lily deserves every advantage. You can't blame me for wanting that for her. The sarcasm landed soft but precise, the same tone she had used on the call. I felt the old familiar pressure behind my ribs, the one that used to make me apologize just to make the room breathe again. This time I didn't. I saw the email I said. The words came out flat. The one you sent Helen 2 weeks ago with the photo. For half a second, her face went still. Then she gave a small, disbelieving laugh that didn't reach her eyes. You went through my email. That's low even for you. I leave the account open for 2 minutes and you decide you have the right to snoop. I didn't snoop. The screen was on when I walked past. The caption on that old picture of me said I was the one who always needed extra help. That I still do. She crossed her arms, the gesture small and defensive. That photo is from a family album. Helen and I were reminiscing. You're reading things into it that aren't there. You've always been sensitive about your childhood, Emily. I was simply explaining to a friend why I still feel the need to step in sometimes. The gaslighting came so smoothly it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the quick pivot to make me the unstable one for noticing. My hands stayed loose at my sides, but inside something hot and sharp started to burn. I turned and walked back to the nook without answering. The computer screen still glowed. I sat down again and opened the rest of the thread. There were more messages going back months. My mother had been feeding Helen a steady stream of details about my life, the late tuition payment she had covered, the way I had panicked when she offered to talk to Lily's teacher, the fact that I was raising Lily alone and clearly struggling. She framed every offer of money or advice as reluctant generosity forced on her by my failures. In one message, she wrote that the family had always had to prop Emily up, and that without her interventions, Lily would be falling behind like her mother did. The falsified history sat there in black and white. My mother had spent years telling Helen and whoever else would listen that our family succeeded because she held it together while quietly painting me as the weak link who kept needing rescue. The success story was hers, the failures were mine, and she had been leaking the private pieces of my life to make sure the story stayed consistent. I saved the thread to a folder on my phone. My hands were steady, but the pulse in my ears was loud. Behind me, I heard footsteps. My mother had followed me into the nook. She stood in the doorway, arms still crossed. You're really going to make this into a thing, she said. Her voice had dropped into that low, disappointed register she used when she wanted me to feel like a child again. Helen is my friend. I talk to her about family. That doesn't mean I'm plotting against you. You're turning a normal conversation into some kind of betrayal. I turned in the chair to face her. You told her I made a scene about the tutoring. You told her I was pushing family away. You attached a picture of me as a kid with a caption calling me the difficult one. That's not normal conversation. That's you rewriting my life for an audience. She let out a short bit of breath. Oh, for heaven's sake, you're 30 years old and still acting like everything is an attack. I have been nothing but generous with you and with Lily. I paid for things you couldn't. I offered to help with school, and this is how you repay me by accusing me of what exactly? Talking to a friend. The contempt was no longer hidden. It sat right on the surface now, cold and familiar. I felt the hurt rise fast and hard, the same hurt that had lived in me since I was small enough to believe her version of me. I pushed it back down, feeling it fully would have to wait. I'm not accusing you of talking, I said. I'm telling you I heard what you said and I read what you wrote. You don't get to call it generosity when you use it to control how I raise my daughter and then complain about me behind my back. Her eyes narrowed. For a moment, I thought she might apologize or at least drop the mask. Instead, she gave me the smile she used when she wanted to end a conversation without losing. You're exhausted. We both are. Let's not do this tonight. Lily is asleep. We can talk in the morning like adults. She turned and left the nook before I could answer. I stayed where I was, staring at the screen until the words blurred. The controlled narrative she had built was cracking, but she was already trying to patch it with the same tools she had always used: dismiss, redirect, make me the problem. I closed the email and stood up. My legs felt heavier than they should have. I walked to the back bedroom and checked on Lily. She was curled on her side, one arm thrown over the blanket, breathing steady. I sat on the edge of the bed for a minute and let myself feel the weight of what I had just learned. Then I stood again. Feeling it too long would not change anything. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from my cousin Brian. He was supposed to have joined us for part of the weekend, but had cancelled earlier in the week because of work. The message was short: change of plans, driving up tonight, should be there in an hour. Mom said the cabin was open. See you soon. I stared at the screen. Brian arriving meant another person in the middle of whatever this was becoming. My mother would use him as another audience, another chance to perform the generous matriarch while I stayed silent. Or I could tell him what I had found. The thought made my stomach twist. Dragging Brian into it would make the crack in the family story wider, and I was not sure I was ready for that yet. I texted back a simple okay and put the phone down. Then I went back to the living room. My mother was in the kitchen now, making tea with the same careful movements she used when she wanted the room to feel normal. She glanced up when I came in. "Brian's on his way," I said. She nodded, unsurprised. "Good. It'll be nice to have more family here. Maybe he can talk some sense into you about accepting help when it's offered." The jab was small and precise. I let it land without reacting. Inside, the anger was starting to settle into something colder and more useful. I had the emails, I had the photo, I had heard the phone call. The story she had been telling about me was no longer just words in the air, it was documented. I walked past her to the couch and sat down. The cabin was quiet, except for the kettle starting to whistle. My mother poured 2 cups without asking if I wanted one and set one on the table in front of me like a peace offering I had not asked for. "We don't have to fight about this," she said, her voice softer now, almost gentle. "I love you and Lily. That's all that matters. Everything else is just noise." I looked at the cup of tea and then at her. The gentleness was another layer of the same performance. I picked up the cup because refusing would give her another story to tell Helen later. "I love Lily too," I said. "Enough to stop letting you rewrite what's happening to us." Her expression flickered just for a second. Then the mask slid back into place. She sat across from me with her own cup and took a slow sip. "We'll see how you feel in the morning," she said. "Things always look different after a good night's sleep." I didn't answer. I drank the tea and watched the steam rise between us. The crack in her narrative was real now, and I could feel her already working to close it before Brian arrived and before I had time to decide what I was going to do with the evidence sitting on my phone. The kettle had gone quiet. The only sound left was the low hum of the old refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock on the wall. My mother kept her eyes on her cup, but I could feel her watching me anyway, waiting to see if I would back down the way I always had before. I set my cup down and stood up. "I'm going to check on Lily again." She nodded without looking up. "Do what you need to do." I walked down the short hallway to the back bedroom. Lily was still asleep. I stood in the doorway for a long moment listening to her breathe. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I had saved the email thread. The photo of me as a child was still there, smiling at a camera while my mother looked away. The caption underneath it felt heavier now that I had said the words out loud. I closed the folder and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The decision I had been circling since I heard the phone call was starting to take shape. I could stay and keep playing the role my mother had written for me, or I could stop. Brian would be here soon. Helen was still out there with the version of me my mother had fed her for months, and Lily was sleeping in a bed that belonged to a family story I no longer recognised. I stayed in the doorway a little longer, letting the weight of it settle. Then I turned and walked back toward the living room. My mother was still sitting at the table, her tea untouched, now her hands folded in her lap like she was praying for the version of me that used to apologise. The cabin felt smaller than it had when we arrived. The crack was widening and neither of us was pretending it wasn't there anymore. Brian's headlights swept across the front windows just as I stepped back into the living room. My mother was still at the table, her tea gone cold. She looked up at the sound of tyres on gravel and smoothed her face into something warmer. Brian made good time, she said, already standing. It'll be good to have him here. He always brings a little perspective. I didn't answer. The car door slammed outside, then another. Brian wasn't alone. When the door opened, he stepped in first. Tall and tired from the drive, carrying a duffel bag. Behind him came Jessica Lane, his girlfriend of 2 years, a woman I had only met twice before. She smiled politely and set a small cooler on the floor. "Hope we're not too late," Brian said, glancing between us. Jessica wanted to come last minute, said she could use the quiet. My mother moved forward to hug him, then Jessica, her voice bright, with the performance she had perfected. "You're right on time. Emily and I were just having a little talk about family and how important it is to accept help when it's offered." Jessica's smile faltered slightly. She looked at me. I kept my face still. Brian dropped his bag by the couch. "Everything okay here? You two look like you've been through it." Before I could answer, my mother laughed lightly. "Oh, you know how Emily gets when she's tired. She's been reading too much into things tonight. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." The sarcasm was back wrapped in concern for Brian and Jessica's benefit. I felt the familiar sting, but it no longer landed the same way. I had the emails, I had the photo, and now there were witnesses. I walked to the nook without excusing myself and came back with my phone. I opened the folder and set the device on the coffee table in front of Brian. Read that I said. My voice stayed level, starting with the email from 2 weeks ago, then the one from last month. The photo is attached to the first one. Brian frowned but picked up the phone. Jessica leaned over his shoulder. My mother stayed by the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed again. The room went quiet, except for the soft sounds of Brian scrolling. Jessica's face changed first. She looked up at my mother, then at me. "This says you paid for Lily's tutoring without telling Emily," Jessica said quietly, "and that you told Helen Emily made a scene about it." Brian kept reading, his jaw tightened. When he reached the photo and its caption, he set the phone down slowly. "Mom," he said, using the name he had always used for my mother, even though she was his aunt. "What is this?" My mother's expression shifted into wounded surprise. The same mask she had worn on the phone with Helen. "Brian's sweetheart. You're seeing one side of a conversation. Helen and I were catching up. Emily has always been sensitive about accepting help. I was simply explaining why I still feel responsible for making sure Lily has what she needs." The contempt underneath the words was unmistakable now that Brian and Jessica were hearing it. She was still trying to rewrite the moment in real time. I picked up the phone and opened the full thread. There are 6 more messages like this. All of them go to Helen. All of them describe me as difficult, ungrateful, and incapable. All of them frame every offer of money or advice as something I forced you into. You've been leaking private details about my life and Lily's life to someone outside this family for months. Jessica's eyes widened. Brian looked at my mother like he was seeing her for the first time. My mother's voice turned sharp. You had no right to read those. That was between Helen and me. You're twisting everything because you hate that I still have a relationship with my granddaughter that doesn't go through you. The jab was personal and deliberate. It hit the place where the hurt lived, the place that had always made me back down. This time I stayed standing. I don't hate your relationship with Lily, I said. I hate that you use it to control me and then complain about me to your friend when I set a boundary. I hate that you've spent years telling people I'm the problem child who needs saving while you get to be the generous one holding the family together. Brian stood up. Aunt Carol, this isn't okay. You can't talk about Emily like that to outsiders and then act surprised when she finds out. My mother's face hardened. She looked at Brian, then at Jessica, then back at me. The performance cracked further. You're all ganging up on me now, she said, her voice low and bitter. I have done nothing but try to help this family. Emily has always pushed me away. She's the one who decided she could raise Lily without any support. I simply told Helen the truth so someone would understand why I keep offering anyway. Jessica shook her head slowly. That's not how it reads. It sounds like you've been keeping score and making sure Helen sees Emily as the difficult one. The controlled narrative was collapsing in front of witnesses exactly the way I had feared and hoped it would. But the collapse didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing in the middle of something breaking that could never be put back the same way. My mother turned to me, her eyes cold. If you're going to make this public, then you can deal with the consequences. I won't be spoken to like this in my own family's cabin. If you can't accept that I was only trying to help, then maybe you should leave. The ultimatum landed exactly where she meant it to. Leave the cabin. Leave the family story she controlled. Leave the photo albums and the inherited memories she had curated for years. The final loss was already forming in the space between us. I looked at Brian and Jessica. Brian's face was tight with anger on my behalf. Jessica looked sick. Neither of them moved to defend my mother's version. I turned back to my mother. I'm taking Lily home tonight. You can keep the cabin and the stories you've told about me. I'm done letting you use generosity as a way to rewrite my life. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once she had no ready reply. The mask slipped, completely revealing the resentment that had lived underneath the help for years. I walked to the back bedroom and woke Lily gently. She rubbed her eyes, but didn't argue when I told her we were going home early. I packed our things in under 10 minutes. When I came back out, Brian was standing by the door with my bag. I'll follow you down the mountain, he said quietly. Make sure you get home safe. Jessica nodded. Text us when you're back. My mother stayed by the table. She didn't offer to help. She didn't say goodbye to Lily. She just watched us leave with the same cold expression she had used on the phone with Helen. The drive down the dark road felt longer than the drive up had. Lily fell back asleep in her booster seat. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the tears come quiet and steady, the kind that didn't make noise. The emotional breakdown I had been holding off for years arrived in the dark between the pine trees. I cried for the mother I had wanted, for the family story I had believed, for the years I had spent accepting help that came with a price tag written in leaked details and rewritten memories. By the time we reached the main road, the tears had slowed. What was left was a strange, clear quiet. I had chosen my dignity over the cabin, over the photo albums, over the version of me my mother had been selling to Helen for months. The choice hurt. It would keep hurting, but it was mine. 2 days later, my phone rang while Lily was at school. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice was different, smaller, I talked to Helen, she said. No greeting, no performance. She told me she already knew most of what was in those emails because I had been saying the same things to her for years. She said she was tired of being the person I complained to about my own daughter. The final conversation revealed the full picture I hadn't wanted to see. My mother had been leaking private details about me to Helen for so long that even Helen had grown weary of it. The controlled narrative hadn't just cracked for Brian and Jessica. It had worn thin for the one person my mother trusted to keep her secrets. I don't know what you want me to say, my mother continued. I was trying to protect the family. You make it so hard. I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where the pipe had burst 2 weeks earlier, and felt the last thread of obligation snap. You don't have to protect me anymore, I said. And I don't need your version of help. I'm done. I ended the call before she could answer. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the power I had reclaimed by refusing to keep the story alive. Lily came home from school that afternoon with a drawing of the three of us, her, me, and the new version of our life that didn't require my mother's approval or her leaks. I hung it on the refrigerator and let myself feel the peaceful acceptance that had been waiting on the other side of the breakdown. Real family had never been the people who made me disappear so they could stay the hero. Real family was the small, steady life I was building with my daughter, one boundary at a time. I had lost the cabin. I had lost the photo albums and the inherited stories my mother still controlled. I had lost the easy version of family that had never really existed. What I kept was my dignity and the truth my daughter would grow up knowing no one gets to rewrite you just because they once paid for tutoring. Thank you for listening to my story. If this helped you see a boundary you need to set or a story you've been accepting that no longer fits, comment healing below. I read every single one.